Hop on board and take a ride with us on the Soul Train with Guess the Emotions, Maze featuring Frankie Beverly, and a guy doing the robot.
Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
Wow, I'm Rick, and I'm impressed.
Oh, thank you. I could have tried to do the high thing, but
Yeah, I think you made the right choice.
I might have injured myself.
Yes, we don't want that.
Yeah.
It's bad enough that we risk injury doing the splits later when we go down the line.
Right, yeah.
So vocal injuries, let's try to avoid. Let's stick to good old-fashioned physical injuries.
I have been practicing my splits.
You have?
Yeah. It was a little rough for a few days, but
I can imagine.
I think I'm getting there. Also, the robot, I was practicing that.
Yeah, that's a little bit less stress.
Yeah. So, we're going to be talking about the long-lived syndicated Soul Train today. And this was one of our listener poll shows. And I'll let Rick tell you about the poll.
Well, the people have spoken again. We like to do this, I think, at least once a season now. We're going to make this a tradition. But we wanted to do a musical-themed episode this season. And we let people in our Facebook group decide which series we would cover in this particular musical episode. And choices were Soul Train, which wound up winning. Also, Solid Gold and American Bandstand. American Bandstand, of course, a very long-running show in syndication, and Solid Gold, another syndicated show. Didn't last quite as long as these other two, but give credit to Soul Train. Our listeners wanted to hear us talk about Soul Train, and that's what we're going to do.
And really, who better to talk about it?
Yeah, I can't help but wonder what the motivation was for people that wanted to hear us talk about Soul Train.
Right.
Is it because they love the show? Is it because they were curious how we would talk about Soul Train? I don't know.
I don't know either. I myself didn't really ever watch it as a kid. My memory is it was on like at a weird 4 o'clock on Saturdays or something, and it would sort of come on at the end of something else I was watching. I remember the train, obviously.
Yeah.
Certain aspects, but I didn't really watch it even when I got into music. Solid Gold I did watch for a while. American Bandstand I never really watched either. And I think shows like these, like Solid Gold, I would watch in the hopes that the people I was into would show up on there. And then at some point I realized, most of them were a little too big for Solid Gold. Lionel Richie wasn't going to show up on Solid Gold in 1985. He probably did, when his first album came out. But
I think a similar thing happened with Soul Train, too. It seems like in the early years, it was a destination, but as the show went on, even as it gained more, prominence, became more of an institution, some of the big superstars of the 1980s and 1990s, they wouldn't necessarily be on Soul Train.
I mean, once you have MTV, do you need to go on a show like that?
Exactly, yeah. I think that's a big part of it.
Especially since you're not performing live. So there's really, even you're pretending to, but there's nothing unique. And a video is more interesting visually.
Right.
If you're not going to perform live.
Yeah, so I guess a lot of the big superstar artists, they would be on Soul Train in the form of a music video, which isn't really the same, but at least they have a presence there, and the show gets an association with them. They get the exposure, so I guess that seemed like a win-win of sorts. But I wanted to talk briefly about how, with my experience, I remember Soul Train being on, I think, the New York Channel 11 station a lot on Saturdays, maybe around noon or something. Probably it would be on after wrestling, and I wouldn't make it a point to sit down and watch Soul Train, but I do remember it being on a lot, and maybe me checking it every now and then, seeing what was going on it, but not necessarily appointment viewing, and I probably watched something like Solid Gold more on a regular basis. But I do remember Soul Train being on. It seemed like a regular presence for a while, and then at some point, probably somewhere in the 1990s, it became kind of like what you were alluding to, like being in more oddball time slots. And maybe earlier this season, we talked about the Baseball Bunch. And that was a syndicated show that I think was often plugged in as filler or would be preempted by things. Because, Weekend weekend syndicated programming can be a little volatile, and I think Soul Train probably suffered from that a little bit over the years. And by the 1990s and even into the 2000s, it was still on, but it wasn't nearly the big part of everybody's lives as it was like in its heyday in the 1970s and early 1980s.
Yeah, and I have to admit I didn't, for various reasons, didn't do a ton of research, but I guess Don Cornelius was a little really not into hip hop much, and a little, kind of put off by it, and so he was slow to sort of adjust to the changing scene in the 80s and 90s, and left the show in the 90s, right?
Yeah, I think that can be said. I think part of it was he felt that he was getting older and he didn't want to bring down the show and make it seem less hip. And I think he might have been a little sensitive to being mocked in popular culture and thought, well, it's kind of more of a younger man's game. So he stayed in power behind the scenes, but sort of yielded the hosting duties to younger people, which makes sense.
Dick Clark never did that.
No, but Dick Clark never aged, of course, as we all know.
Right, yeah. And then finally, when he did, I guess when he had his health issues, he gave up the New Year's gig to Seacrest. But you're right, yeah.
And it seems like Don Cornelius was very image conscious, and one of his big missions in creating Soul Train and producing it was not just to make a ton of money, but to provide, positive, as it would have been called then, Afrocentric images and, positive television portrayals of Black life and give exposure to, elements of society that weren't getting widespread television exposure at the time. I'm reading it right now. I had it a while ago, the Questlove book about Soul Train. I think years ago I had read, I think Nelson George wrote a book about Soul Train that was more focused on the business aspects maybe. Whereas Questlove, it's interesting because he's going through, not at all from like a scholarly point of view, but from a very personal point of view, sort of telling the history of the show as through the eyes of someone who watched it and like highlighting specific episodes and how the show changed and introducing a lot of really good insight along the way. But he talks about like his personal experience growing up in the early 70s and seeing Soul Train coming on and just being blown away because he just didn't see Black people on TV very often, let alone a show with Black hosts, and later finding out that there were Black people behind the scenes and producing it. And also, a big part of Soul Train was the sponsorship by the Johnson Products Company. And so you'd see commercials for Black products. So it's easy to forget that now because today's media landscape is so much different. But in 1971, when Soul Train went into syndication, it really was kind of a revolutionary thing. There were maybe a handful of shows on all of TV that had Black leads, let alone an entire cast of Black people dancing, performing, and hosting.
Well, when I was watching it, I had that, duh kind of reaction, but I was like just looking at a screen full of Black people who are all like good looking and having a good time, and it is very positive. And I thought, yeah, that because there's so much conversation now about wanting to see yourself and needing to see yourself on screen, that must have been an amazing thing if you were Black. But also, I think if white people are watching it, it's hopefully a positive thing for them too. Look, it's just people,
right?
And they look like great people. Like people you want to hang out with, and even because this conversation's out there too, a variety of different looking people. They all seem a little thin in the episode we watched, but
yeah,
it was the 70s. But hairstyles and clothing and dress and skin tone and all of those things are there, and and they're all young. But it just seemed like a good place, a positive place.
Yeah, and it became sort of a nationalizing influence too, because as yes, on one hand, it was unique to see, people, for Questlove to see people of his ethnicity on TV. He also points out that everything in the culture was so much more regionalized back then. And it was, you'd have local programs kind of, especially up until the 70s, that would start to go away a little bit. But this was a way to find out what other people were doing in a way, because you would maybe see your local shows or there were like local dance shows. And Soul Train started in Chicago before moving to Los Angeles and becoming nationally syndicated. But Soul Train kind of was a way for everybody to see, okay, this is what's going on, kind of a national thing. Whereas for many years, music and music television, you'd have your shows like American Bandstand, but you'd also have a lot of regional dance shows, youth-focused things, and people would be doing their own thing in, Detroit or, Chicago, Philadelphia, places like that. So I think Soul Train also had an important impact in the sense that it showed a lot of the youth culture, and maybe it was a springboard for, national trends and things like that, because the whole country could be seeing this sort of thing.
Can I just offer one small correction? I believe it's Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, PA. Isn't it? Are those the right cities?
Yes,
I know
your...
Huey Lewis was never on Soul Train, as far as I know, but
I don't think he was, but there was a surprising amount of Blue-Eyed Soul on Soul Train as I went through the list.
oh yeah,
And one thing, I think as we go through, I can maybe, sprinkle in some of the things I found in my research, but I believe the show, like in 1984, 1985, around that time, that was the highest rated Soul Train had ever been, which is really incredible to me because I assume that the absolute peak of the show would have been in the, the funk, R&B, soul, and yes, even disco era of the 1970s. But in the Questlove book, he says that I think seasons 14 and 15, which would have been about 84, 85, 86, were the highest rated of the show. And he points to a lot of it was Don Cornelius. He may not have been ahead of the game as far as it comes to hip hop, but he was really good about keeping an eye on other trends. And he was big on bringing bands like, Aha and Don Henley was on Soul Train. And in the 80s, he brought a lot of like the European bands that were big on MTV. He brought them on a Soul Train to great success. And often he would have them right as they were breaking out with like a big MTV hit. So apparently the Europeans had a big impact on Soul Train's ratings.
you said Don Henley was.
Yes, he was. There's an actual picture in the book. I'd love to see that performance. I think he did All She Wants to Do Is Dance. It's on there. And he, Don Cornelius interviewed him and said something to the effect of, I didn't know you had that much funk in you or something like that.
Wow. We got to find that.
Yeah. Speaking of finding, if I may go off in a little rant, should I go off in a rant now or should I save this for later?
Why don't you go off on? You already teed it up.
All right. You're right. I'm a little bit angry the more I get into Soul Train, and yeah, granted, I didn't watch it a lot growing up, but like I said, it was always on, and I think it deserves respect. It was, on, 30-some years in syndication, but it's hard to find. I assumed that Soul Train, like, full episodes would be a little bit easier for us to come by because the show's been around so long, and because it's not being actively displayed anywhere. Well, here's what happens is, once again, MTV Networks, Viacom, that whole company, they bought the show, years ago, and they're burying it. They're sitting on it. For a while, it was leased on Centric, which was a spin-off channel of BET. For a while, it was on Bounce. I think maybe the episode we're going to talk about today, I think it was an off-air recording from Bounce TV. But now, and you can't find nearly as many episodes as you used to on YouTube because they've been pulled. And a lot of people have these cool Soul Train playlists, and you see them, it'll be like, best of Soul Train, 400 clips, and then you go through the playlist and it's like 370 of them are missing. And I don't think it's because the uploader took them down. I think it's because, the copyright police came along and pulled them, which I can understand protecting the thing. But if you go to like the official Soul Train website, such as it is now, is essentially BET Network saying, hey, if you want to license the Soul Train clips, here's how to get in contact with us. It's like, no, that's disrespectful. Make the show available somewhere. I think there's been a Time Life collection, which, probably isn't in print anymore. But BET isn't showing Soul Train. The official Soul Train YouTube channel has some interview clips, and it's mostly about hyping the Soul Train Awards. So to me, it looks like it's totally been corporatized, and Soul Train is essentially a brand now. It's something to be licensed out. It's a name for these awards that BET can make money off of. But the actual show itself is sitting buried in their archives, and they probably have, really good footage in there, and it doesn't seem to me like they're doing anything with it, and it irritates me, and it kind of goes to, it's not just an ethnic thing either, I think, because they're doing the same thing with American Bandstand, it appears. You don't see that anywhere, and many other shows that they've bought up, apparently so that no other competitor can challenge them in music television. I think it's a sad thing.
Even though they stopped showing music on music television?
Exactly. I mean, they've got, 15 digital channels like, MTV Classic or how many spinoffs where they could easily show Soul Train reruns. And to my knowledge, they're not doing anything like that. And maybe they're making them available to someone and they're just not getting any takers. But it looks to me like they're just sitting on the brand. And I think early on in the Questlove book, he mentions that, unfortunately, like a lot of the iconic sets and the props that were such fixtures on the Soul Train set, they're not around anymore, so they can't be displayed in a museum. And in this case, it's not because, it's not really deliberate malfeasance, but apparently Don Cornelius thought they were too expensive to store and didn't really see like the historic or cultural value of them, which is kind of surprising. So when some of that stuff could be sitting in the Smithsonian, a lot of it was destroyed. So we're left to kind of forage for Soul Train, unfortunately.
So here's my theory that I just came up with. They're Viacom, CBS Viacom, whatever we're calling it these days. They're waiting for the moment when the Hyperloop is finally real and they can bring it back as the Soul Hyperloop.
Soul Hyperloop.
Yeah. The hippest, fastest show on TV. It's just like, a 2-minute show.
You know, I desperately want that to be true. That would make it all worthwhile. Keep the show off the air for 10 years,
Right.
as long as it can be reborn with
clean fuel.
the Soul Hyperloop.
Yeah, the Soul Hyperloop.
I think you're onto something there. And if and when that happens, I will apologize.
Okay.
How about that?
That sounds good. I'll write that down.
Yes. Yes, hold me to that, everybody.
Yeah. But we did luckily find a few episodes, so we're able to talk about one.
We did, and I kind of wanted to do something in the 1970s, and I think I got us right smack in the dab of the disco era, which I don't know, I thought it might be more on the edge of it, but kind of looking back, it seems like disco really got big, like maybe around 1975. And interestingly, I'll mention Questlove again, maybe the last time for a little while, but he seems to really resent the disco era.
Really?
Yeah, I think he's down on it, and he says it's his least favorite part of the show from 76 to 79 or something like that, and is really down on that compared to some of the other eras of the show, which that kind of surprised me. And I think maybe that's one thing we can kind of get into is as much of a malignant reputation disco has. A lot of what is disco and sort of associated with disco, the music on this show, it doesn't sound all that bad to me, and it doesn't sound all that much different from a lot of the other R&B and funk of the 70s. I think there's a lot more crossover than you might think at first glance.
Yeah, I think so. I think I've just come to the conclusion that I don't mind disco. I mean, not just come to that conclusion, but watching something like this, I'm like, this it's good, and I guess maybe learning some more about the sort of origins of it and stuff, and you realize that it became this slick commercial thing, but it kind of like hip hop came out of those same underground scenes in New York, and and had a cultural significance to certain groups that you don't hear about that part because people weren't talking about it. All you hear is the cheesy parts and Saturday Night Fever and things like that. But as far as the music on the episode we did, I enjoyed everything, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of this music from this era holds up a lot better than a lot of the music from like the 80s and early 90s. It's not my favorite necessarily, but yeah, I think this episode offers a lot of variety, actually, surprisingly. I mean, if when we tell people, oh, this is kind of like a disco era episode, they might think that every single thing is going to be like a Bee Gees track or Disco Inferno, but it's not like that at all. I mean, now you do see a disco ball at a lot of the wide shots pretty prominently on the set, but within this era, there's a lot of variety in this particular episode. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I could understand at the time to some extent, like, because disco took over the airwaves so much that if you were into other pop music, that you would resent that, or if you're a Rolling Stones fan, you would resent them going disco and things like that. But if you just take it as the music and you listen to the grooves and the bass lines and things, it's like, I can't complain. I mean, I'm not a dancer, but I can see why people wouldn't dance to it.
And from the show's point of view, I mean, Don Cornelius is booking guests, and a lot of the guests that he would have booked in the first part of the decade, they were moving into this kind of sound, and whether it be trying to stay relevant, trying to be commercial, or just because they wanted to, I think it would have been very difficult for him to ignore a lot of this music. So I certainly can't hold Soul Train responsible for going forward and featuring a lot of that music on the show.
Yeah, and frankly, some R&B artists, or at least the people making the music, seem to be not have a problem making commercial choices, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Like they see the business part of it, and so that if disco's popular, that's what they're going to do.
I do think one thing that you could say about disco relative to other genres of the time, I mean, it does seem to be particularly commercial. One aspect of that some people might frown on is, and I think you kind of hear about it in pop music today, actually, is producer centric. I think there's at least one of the acts that we hear from a song from, it's essentially two producers, coming together and maybe doing studio musicians, maybe very talented studio musicians, but some people might see that as less authentic and more manufactured. And I guess that's an accusation that could be hurled at a lot of the disco era.
Yeah, I think so. And one of the quote unquote live acts that we see, the Emotions, one of their songs I felt like was overproduced. No offense to the great Maurice White, but it's sort of like overwhelmed the singing, and that's a vocal group. It's not a dance band or a.
Yeah, well, you know what?
Seemed like there was some good singing going on in there, but it kind of got, especially because we're watching, a YouTube dub of a VHS tape from broadcast of a show that probably didn't have the best audio in the first place. I think I would have to listen to the actual recording to see if it's as bad, but there was just so much going on behind them that I kind of lost track of the vocals.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you just brought up something that Soul Train was, spread out from some major markets, but it wasn't necessarily on the biggest, most prestigious channels in those markets. A lot of people might have grown up watching it on, UHF stations and with not great reception. And as visual a show as Soul Train was, and a show based on music, a lot of people probably had kind of a suboptimal experience, although, they didn't have a lot to compare it to back then. But that's a good point, which is why it would be great to see a better presentation of this material, now in this era, if we could see it with better sound and at least just respectable looking video, it would really, really improve the experience of watching the show now.
It's hard to know how good whatever the masters are, but, and people were used to crappy audio in that era too, because you listen to everything on radio, which is known for not having great audio. So
right, and maybe like AM radio too. And I guess part of where I'm coming from is, and this is my fault because I selected this episode, is I kind of unwittingly selected one of the, the lesser quality probably dubs that are on there as far as the full episodes, and that's on me. But I would just I would settle for just seeing something that's not like a second generation VHS dub.
Right. So should we get into this? Should we get on the train?
Let's get on board. And unfortunately, that's one thing about this era. The theme song is not my favorite theme song. I prefer the classic Sound of Philadelphia theme song, which has recurred several times over the years, but that was replaced, I think. I think the one we hear, this one is Soul Train 76 by the Soul Train Gang. And, it's fine, but it's not the real. I think most people would recognize the Sound of Philadelphia as the classic theme.
Since you mentioned a group doing this, I saw a number of references. Did Don Cornelius, was he the man behind Shalimar? Is that part of his deal?
Essentially, he was. A couple of the members of it started as dancers, like Jody Watley and Jeffrey, can't remember his last name, but they sort of came about from it. And Don Cornelius tried to be kind of a record mogul for a while. With it, this Soul Train Gang was, I think Shalimar came out of, it was more indirect with maybe a little bit of his influence, but Soul Train Gang was like a direct creation of him, like starting a label and starting a band.
Also, I guess he started as like a news reader. I would love to have Don Cornelius reading the news.
Yeah. Any kind of news.
Yeah. Human interest, very serious. I don't care. It would have been great.
Right. He would make it sound cool.
Yeah. And he's looking cool here in this episode. He's making those 70s earth tones work.
He is. And I think this episode is actually a good showcase. It's not flashy, but there's the effortlessness about it. He doesn't seem sweating or anything like that. I mean, and this is the guy that's not just doing the interviews, but he put the whole thing together. So yeah, I was impressed by Don in this episode.
He's got seems like a sort of a cream colored suit and this really wide brown tie, and his microphone matches his suit. I don't know if that was the case every week, but that was pretty cool. And his outfit sort of matched what the emotions were wearing.
I hadn't noticed that, yes.
So it opens with Soul Train dancers dancing to Ohio by the Ohio Players.
I did a little bit of research on some of the songs that were featured, and if I may, I'd just like to point out that this particular song hit number 9 on the Billboard R&B chart and number 45 on the Hot 100 chart. And Ohio was one of the real big epicenters of funk in the 1970s, and Ohio Players Company, very big band at the time. Maybe not so much nowadays, but yes, at the time they were real big.
Was it a particular part of Ohio was it like Cleveland or?
I think it was Medina, Ohio. And there was a young guy named Tony. No, I don't know. I'm thinking probably like, I won't speculate. I don't know for sure.
Presumably a city.
Yes. And this episode, by the way, from what I can tell, was a season 7 episode, and it would have premiered October 1st, 1977.
So, and then the next song is Idris Muhammad doing Turn This Mother Out. And I don't know much about that other than that phrase, of course. And, there was a guy kind of doing a modified robot during this.
Yeah, that guy would pop up later. I think the guy in the brown suit, right?
Yes, yeah.
And yeah, I enjoyed, I actually enjoyed his performances. And there was also a guy in kind of a white suit that was just dancing a kind of a tentative manner, and I kind of enjoyed his work for some reason too. He just didn't seem to be totally embracing the song or something like that. It seemed a little out of place.
He wasn't turning the mother out.
I don't think so. I think he was maybe bending the mother a little bit, but
Yeah.
certainly not turning it out. Don announced it as Idris Muhammad. I think originally it was, well, or it was also done by Van McCoy, who did The Hustle a couple of years earlier. Don't know much about this version of it, but he was apparently known as a drummer, Idris Muhammad, and I don't know, maybe this might have been his biggest hit. We can look into that more, but yeah, this recording was a new one for me, I think.
And then we go to a part I know you were hoping was going to be in this episode.
Oh, yeah. Well, we had a classic staple of every respectable Soul Train episode, the Soul Train Scramble, where two young dancers are invited by Don to come up and unscramble the letters. In this case, it's a sports figure, an athlete, and they have, like 30 seconds or something to do it. And I can't remember seeing too many people fail at this. I do remember this, seeing this a lot, maybe in clips or looking for it in particular, but I think Don Cornelius had said that knowing he didn't want people to look bad on the show or embarrass anybody, so they wouldn't exactly give super brain teasers. It would usually just be the name of a celebrity or something like that. And you'd have two people doing it. And in this case, it's Brian and Rita Brooks. And I will say she is no relation.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe she was your aunt or something.
Not that I know of, but she did the Brooks name proud in this one, I would say. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah. So they had 60 seconds. And they got it done in just over 30 seconds. And I feel good because I was able to figure it out.
Oh, good.
Word scrambles are not always my thing, but I did put together that it was Reggie Jackson pretty quickly.
Nice.
Obviously, they had put it together. They just had to get all the letters in place.
Yeah, and Reggie was huge back then. I think this would have been his first year in New York with the Yankees, but he was already famous and had won World Series and done quite a bit in baseball. But he was about to take it to another level here, so a very appropriate choice for the Soul Train Scramble board.
He was about to stir the drink.
He was.
And then we get our first live performance. And
yes. Oh, if I may, just for the record, let me just point out there was a song, Deeper, I think it was called, by New Birth. And New Birth, this is an act I didn't know much about, but fairly long-running band, and I couldn't find any record of it being released as an actual single, maybe like a 12-inch dance mix or something like that. So I don't have any chart information for it, but background music essentially for people to dance and for them to do the scramble.
So the first performance is by Maze with a Z, featuring Frankie Beverly. And I had never heard of this band, but I dig them. They seemed like a real band. It wasn't a vocal band or anything. It was a vocal group. It was a band in the sense of guys playing instruments.
I totally agree. And they were originally named, I think, Raw Soul was their band, which is interesting. And, Frankie Beverly and Maze, it's kind of a weird thing. Like, I knew of them, but didn't really know a lot about their music. And I think through the 80s, it was something like, if I had BET on, you'd hear about them maybe there, or you'd see them on the cover of, like, Ebony Magazine or Jet, So it seemed like they were probably really big in black culture, but not big on, the radio that I grew up listening to. And I always get confused of whether it's Frankie Beverly featuring Maze featuring Frankie Beverly, or Frankie Beverly and Maze, or just Maze sometimes. So
right, yeah. So they got a lot of help from Marvin Gaye, and I think in both of the songs they do, you can kind of hear why he might have been into them. Like, they fit right in with the stuff he was doing in the 70s, I think. Social consciousness and just the sort of the instrumentation and the grooves and some of the melodic choices. Now, this song, which is called While I'm Alone, I would say is kind of a mid-tempo song, but it has like a really cool guitar thing going through the whole song. And the drums are really cool too in spots. Yeah,
it had a nice slow groove to it, which was a nice contrast, I think, from what we'd heard at the beginning of the show. This was kind of a change of pace, a little lesser tempo, and yeah, a decent song. And it hit number 21 on the R&B charts and number 87 on the Hot 100.
And I gotta say, they had me fooled. I almost believed it was a real performance, live audio. But then I went and listened to it on Spotify, and I'm pretty sure it's, miming to it, but doing a good job.
Yeah, from what I understand, some artists, very few actually perform live, and I think it was usually like at their insistence. it seems like the preference of Don Cornelius was that they do it, to a recorded track at least. But I think I think Elton John was allowed to do it live and he wanted to. And I think somebody that I read was singled out as Patti LaBelle. Even if there was some kind of recorded track, she would always insist on doing it live. But including most of the big names who were on that show, they would do like a mime of some kind.
Right, which, American Bandstand and Solid Gold were the same way.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of production things, and one thing that I think you don't really know until you see like some behind the scenes shots, and the show is very well produced, and by this time they've been on for a while, and they know what they're doing. But the set is a lot smaller than you might think. So in order to actually do a lot of the live performances, it might take up a lot more of the set and everything like that, especially if you've got like a band with a lot of members in it. So that might technical considerations, and plus, making it cheaper and smoother, and the tapings to go faster, all those probably went into it. But it wasn't exactly a cavernous area that they had to do all this in. So I can kind of understand that being a reason why they kind of do recorded performances instead of actual live performances.
Yeah, and I think it is difficult to record live music well, especially in those kind of situations. So it's understandable, and like a band like this might have just been too loud for that room too.
Yeah, good point.
But yeah, a good song, and I'm going to listen to more Maze.
And I want to highlight my personal favorite guy in the band. He's introduced later in the later segment, but I believe his name is Mckinley Williams, and he was the guy playing the tambourine, and had nice hair, good outfit, and really seemed to be like enjoying himself and seemed to be into it. So I kind of picked him out as my personal favorite in the band. Unfortunately, I just kind of like looked him up real quick, and he died unexpectedly of a heart attack. A lot of the band is still together now. Maze is still a thing, but he died a little too young, but wanted to give him a shout.
Well, I want to give Frankie's outfit a shout out. It's also a sort of brown or maybe an orange, but it has like a white arrow pointing up, and it's like a sleeveless shirt. But everything matches. The pants and the shirt match, and this arrow. I mean, it's like a graphic arrow, almost like a pop art kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then he's got a cool leather cap on too.
He does, yeah, kind of topping everything off. Yeah, that was a great outfit by Frankie. I'm glad you highlighted that.
So I mean, there's another reason just to look at Soul Train, just to see what people were wearing back then, especially 70s or 80s. Again, I don't know what was in the water, but it was something. So after that, and in between a lot of these, we do get a lot of cool, fun, animated bumpers too. But we have Casey and the Sunshine Band doing "Wrap Your Arms Around Me."
Yeah, that was a song that hit number 48 on the Hot 124 on the R&B chart, and it's not one they play a lot nowadays, but it does instantly stand out as, okay, yeah, this is Casey and the Sunshine Band, doesn't it?
So what was their big hit? Or their biggest hit?
Let me see. Which would be probably "Get Down Tonight" would be their biggest hit, I would think, off the top of my head. And they were all over the radio, in this during this era. They were a huge band. Again, I guess an example of some blue-eyed soul. Not here in the studio, but get the record played on Soul Train. It's a peppy record.
This is an odd confession, but for some reason my mind, it's the names. It has nothing to do with the music. I sometimes get Casey and the Sunshine Band, the Jay Giles Band, and Katrina and the Waves mixed up.
Wait a minute now. I was sort of with you.
So Katrina and the Waves, it's I'm Walking on Sunshine, right?
Okay, yes, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, I think that's and then Jay Giles and Casey and the Sunshine Band is, but I couldn't even tell you what a Jay Giles band's. Oh, well, Love Stinks, right?
Yeah, and Centerfold, Freeze Frame.
Okay, yeah. So really nothing in common.
Not much.
And then the Emotions come out to perform their first song, Rejoice, from their album, Rejoice. And we learned later, I didn't know anything about the Emotions. They're sisters, and one has replaced the other. And this is definitely an up-tempo song. This is the one I was talking about earlier, where I feel like
okay.
The music overwhelms the vocals. Produced by Maurice White from Earth, Wind & Fire. And it sounds like it. I mean, I could imagine Earth, Wind & Fire doing that song.
Yeah. I'm certainly not going to discount your comments on that. I think they're on point. But you could argue, now this one I don't think was a single, but the album of the same name, Rejoice, was #1 R&B album and #7 on the pop charts. So it was successful. I agree that it was overproduced, but it worked at the time, so I'll give them that.
Well, I believe the Emotions were on the first syndicated episode ever of Soul Train.
I don't know for sure, but
yeah, and I was just looking at Wikipedia, so
okay.
But I believe they were, and Don Cornelius talks about their dad being his good friend.
Yeah, Yeah, he had a lot of connections and he wasn't afraid to use them. And that reminds me, do you happen to know what act had the most appearances on Soul Train?
No.
Well, the Whispers.
The Whispers. All right.
With 16 appearances, and I think they were a band that would, at least for a while, was on that record label like Solar Records, I think, that Don Cornelius started. So they must have been tight with Don. But yeah, the Whispers, and they embraced different styles over the course of the Soul Train era, and they had one of their big hits, maybe their biggest ever hit was Rock Steady, I think, which was a 1980 song that was a big pop hit. So I guess it makes sense that they knew Don, they embraced different styles of music, so that probably adds up to multiple appearances over several decades of Soul Train. So yeah, the Whispers.
Cool. And then the next song we get is really definitely someone I had never heard of and a song I'd never heard of, and it's kind of interesting. CJ and the Company doing The Devil's Gun. Excuse me, The Devil's Gun.
Yeah, and this was the act I was referring to. That was, I think, essentially just two established record producers getting together and having a successful album. This was their biggest hit by far. It was number 2 in the R&B chart, 36 in the pop chart. It was a new one on me. I'll certainly admit that. The Devil's Gun, it wasn't quite my cup of tea, but it had some interesting visuals. People were getting into this and the dancing to it.
Yeah, I don't remember what was the word.
Well, there was one guy doing the thing where he had his female dancing partner and was holding her at his waist. She was like kind of hanging backwards and swung her around, just kind of like he was swinging her around on the floor there. So that was one of the more dynamic moves, especially more dynamic partner moves that we saw in this episode, I think. So it stood out for me.
Here's a question that maybe you know the answer to because of your reading. Were the dancers on the stage, like, was there competition to be a dancer on the stage, or were they like paid dancers or a different status?
You mean on the stage as opposed to just like on the floor?
Yeah.
I think it was a little bit of that. I think it seems like the producers, for one thing, there was competition just to get on the set for a while, especially in the early days of the show. And then there were certain established dancers that they would pretty much have, carte blanche. I think there probably was some of it. I think a lot of that was produced. It wasn't spontaneous with people just being allowed, quote unquote, to be up there. I have to admit, though, that it's not just my reading, but I might be being influenced by watching American Soul on BET, which was their docudrama series about, not even docudrama, it was really just a dramatization of the creation of Soul Train, which is really cool. But on that, they really got into like the competition to be featured as a dancer within the group of dancers. So I think they might have played it up a little bit. I don't think it necessarily stayed like that forever. But yeah, I don't think that was like a spontaneous thing. I know one thing that Cornelius didn't want was he didn't want people interacting with the performers and going up on stage with the performers. That was a big no-no. And there's some famous examples of people like dancing with James Brown or something. And I guess if you were at a certain point, had a status as a dancer, you could get away with that. But it seems like several dancers were reprimanded for kind of crossing boundaries and fraternizing with the acts and things like that. So I think maybe the simplest answer that I could give would be everybody paid attention to what was going on the floor and on the show. And I imagine if Don Cornelius didn't like it, it wouldn't last, and that would include certain dancers being in certain positions.
So Don Cornelius would not have put up with Soy Bomb.
I do not think Don Cornelius would have tolerated Soy Bomb at all.
I want to think now. I'm imagining him at home watching the Grammys, or maybe there. Maybe he went to the Grammys and really just like thinking, oh, this is Bush League.
Yeah, I like the idea of him
Amateur hour.
Tisking, like shaking his head and saying, "Boy, they're running a sloppy ship over there."
Yeah. Okay, and then Don interviews the Emotions, and that's where we find out that Sister, I believe, Pam has taken over for Sister Jeanette, who's having a baby.
And I assume there were no hard feelings there. I don't know for sure, but a lot of times there can be family rivalries, but it seems like all was well with the Emotions, which seems good. They seem like nice people.
Yeah, and we find out they've had a #1 single for 6 weeks, I think, and the album had just entered the pop charts, and they're touring with the Commodores.
Yeah, your guys, the Commodores.
Yeah, that must have been a fun show. And then they do a song called Don't Ask My Neighbor, and so a different Emotion sings that one than sang the first one. And it's definitely a slow jam, a ballad.
Yeah, and I think whereas Rejoice, you could just listen to it and assume, this is like a gospel background, more upbeat and stuff, whereas this is a little bit more I think getting into some more adult themes, I think, with this song.
But it's nice for the the dancers probably needed to slow down a little bit.
A couple of things I took note of, like the song, number 44 on the pop charts, number 7 on the R&B chart. And the interview I thought was, Cornelius seemed very relaxed and had a good rapport with them. And just the interview came off very well. Kind of that thing of like a certain structure to it, but at the same time seeming casual. Maybe not being casual, but seeming casual. And the acts, maybe not the emotions that they've been on there a lot of times, but actually I thought Frankie Beverly seemed a little nervous during the interview that he did. But I thought this one seemed, they might have been, a little nervous, but whether it be Don Cornelius setting the stage or everything, or just the way he handled things, it just showcased what I really like about the interviews. That sort of combination of, okay, they're not going to go off the rails, no pun intended, but it's going to be a little laid back, and it's just kind of like a little chat and stuff. And just, he didn't always do this, but just sometimes he would ask something like, okay, who wrote the song that you're going to do now? And oh, Skip Scarborough. Like, oh yeah, he's a good writer. I looked him up. He co-wrote "Lovely Day," the Bill Withers song. He was an established songwriter, but just I don't know. I mean, you can talk about all kinds of things in these interviews, but it just seemed kind of random why every now and then, Don Cornelius would ask who produced the album or like who wrote it, something like that. But it seems like he's genuinely interested, which is cool.
Yeah. What wasn't Soul Train off the rails? Wasn't that their brief bloopers show?
Don Cornelius and Dick Clark always had that friendly, not so friendly rivalry.
That's right.
those frenemies, which is an interesting aspect of the Soul Train history, which I don't know more about other than it happened that Dick Clark apparently tried to copy the format of the show.
Right.
And, it didn't last.
Yeah, and got kind of accused of, I guess, trying to take over, to appropriate the idea in a way.
Yeah. And I think that can be a loaded word sometimes, but in
Yeah.
that case, I think it's safe to say that's exactly what he was doing. I mean,
Yes.
And yeah, he saw an opportunity, but it didn't work though. So,
and and then potentially, if it had succeeded, maybe putting Soul Train out of business, and Soul Train was black run and all of that. I doubt Dick Clark was thinking that aspect of it. That I'm going to put the black guy out of business, like both in the sense of maliciously and just he didn't think about it in that sense.
The implications.
Yes, yeah.
And he might have thought, well, this show's not going to last. I mean, to a lot of people back then, it would have been not only unheard of, but just kind of like they wouldn't be able to visualize such a black controlled show lasting for 30 some years in syndication. They might have thought, well, they might be a flash in the pan, but they're never going to be able to make it. It just doesn't happen like in the industry where you can have this kind of show last so long. So it could have been just kind of an assumption like, oh, well, this isn't going to last anyway. One thing I didn't know at all until I started reading that book was that there was a British version of Soul Train. It only lasted a couple of years. I think it was maybe in the 80s. It was called like 609 Soul Train or something like that. And it was kind of odd. Instead of just airing Soul Train over there, they launched like an actual UK produced version of the show, which I've never seen anything about that. But
I wonder what like what kind of artists were it? Was it like the Northern Soul kind of thing, or was it black artists or American artists going over there? It's interesting.
Yeah, I think there was an emphasis on local acts or at least regional acts, and Don Cornelius did not go over and host with the British accent. I know that. But I'm curious. I do want to find out more about that version of the show. It seems to be, something that's not talked about very much. It didn't last very long, but it is an interesting part of the show's history.
Yeah. So the next song for the kids to dance to is future Solid Gold host Marilyn McCoo and Billy Davis Jr. Look What You've Done to My Heart. And I can't say that much stood out to me about this song.
No, I can't either. Although I did notice there was a guy on the stage. He was doing a thing where he was opening his jacket and I think maybe pointing to his heart. I don't know if you caught that, but that was kind of a cool little bit he had developed for himself, and that stood out for me.
Yeah, I think I did. I was like, oh, is that some early voguing? But
it may have been.
But yeah, what you're saying makes sense. Yeah. And then the Maze does their second song, Lady of Magic, which is another slow number.
13 on the R&B chart, but only 108 on the pop chart. So just goes to show the Billboard Hot 100 goes well beyond 100, actually.
They made it to the lukewarm.
Yes.
I don't know. What, next 100. I don't know what you call that.
Right.
At least they got close. And I like this song, too. And this had, like when it goes to, in the chorus, I guess, when he, sings like, my lady of magic, or however that goes. There was something slightly Marvin Gaye about that, about the change, like the chord changes that I enjoyed.
Oh, yeah, good point. I'll have to listen to that again, too. I didn't pick up on that. That's a good point.
And then Don interviews Frankie, and their album went gold. He introduces the band and, explains that they're from Philly, but they moved to the Bay Area. And he did seem nervous, or that maybe he has a stammer of some kind.
Yes, I did. I was wondering about that, and maybe it's a little bit of both. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And Don asks him, what does he see himself as most? What does he love the most? The singing, or the musicianship, or composing? And he just, any music. Music is his first love.
Yeah, that was one reason I think I thought that he seemed a little nervous, because I think Don had to kind of ask the question two different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Because he didn't really pick up on what he was asking at first, I think. It seemed like he was trying to come up with... He was self-conscious, maybe would be the best way to say it. He was trying to say something, positive and give like the quote-unquote right answer. It just didn't seem totally comfortable up there. Which is interesting, considering, the act that they were doing and how smooth the performances were. It was an interesting contrast that stood out to me.
He's all about the music and not talking. He doesn't care about talking. That's how I'm going to take it.
Yeah, let's go with that. That works for me too.
He just wants to get back to work, although they're done working for the day.
Yes. Whereas on this podcast, we're pretty much about the talking.
Yeah. Well,
a little bit of singing sometimes, a little bit of dancing, sure.
Right, yeah.
But mostly we're about the talking. So I'm kind of putting myself in his shoes and kind of reversing it, and I'm kind of understanding a little bit more now that you put it like that.
Okay. And speaking of dancing, the next part is the Soul Train line.
Boy, you gotta love the Soul Train line. And one thing that I learned was that originally it was kind of more at the beginning, but Don Cornelius purposefully put this at the end of the show because he thought people would tune into it. It was one of the featured attractions, so that's why it eventually became part of like the latter half of the show rather than up near the beginning, because it was such a popular segment.
So people just wanted to see the dancers like highlighted.
I think so, and I think this is really where you get to see people being showcased, and the dancers would know that they were going to be on camera, and they weren't so much maybe at the whim of the direction, although of course they're at the whim of the editor because they could be cut out, of course, at any time. But I don't know, it seemed like maybe they saved some stuff for this, although some people I think were probably doing the same stuff they'd been doing the whole show. But yeah, I think maybe this is the real focus on dance, the whole thing with music and culture, the overall vibe. But right here is where you can really zero in and see the dance moves, which, yeah, I could see the appeal of that. It's certainly distinctive. And plus, I just like the whole mechanics of it with like people sort of the line moving as people are just kind of moving, as they're making their way up the line, kind of doing like a little, like line dance too. I love that part of it as well.
And I could definitely imagine Soy Bomb taking advantage of that.
Yes.
Possibly at the expense of a couple other dancers.
Now, if he could get into the studio, of course, because the other thing is, Don had a dress code.
Oh.
May not always seem like that, but he insisted on certain things. Like, I think a guy coming in totally with no shirt would be frowned upon.
Especially with Sharpie all over his chest.
Yes. That's not a look that Don Cornelius wanted to present to America.
I wonder if Bob Dylan was ever on Soul Train.
Not that I know of, but wow, I would love to see that. Maybe if he ever follows up on his, what was it, Chronicles, his book, maybe there'll be like a whole chapter of him just like watching one particular Soul Train episode in a hotel room and, just doing a whole chapter on what effect it had on him and his impressions. And nobody would be surprised by any of it, I'm sure.
No, that's the great thing about Bob Dylan. You're always surprised about him, but yet you're not.
Right.
Who knows? He might have like recorded a disco album that he never put out. That'll come out one day in the bootleg series.
Yes. One can hope.
He was clued into things. Anyway, the Emotions follow that up with Best of My Love, and I did recognize this song. I didn't know the name of it, but I recognized it.
Yeah, this is their biggest hit by far. It was number one on both charts, which didn't always happen. As you can tell, by a lot of these numbers I've been given, you can tell like a big disparity. So that a lot of the R&B chart songs didn't cross over, so to speak, to the pop chart. But boy, this one did. This is a smash that you still hear. It's been sampled many times and featured in other songs since then. But yeah, it was a big smash.
And that's pretty much it, except for, of course, the sign off.
Yeah, you gotta love the classic sign off. Some audience participation on that.
The Peace and Soul, or the other part?
I'm just thinking the peace, love, and and everybody yelling soul and doing the gesture,
Because before that, there's the last. You can bet your last money it's all going to be Stone Gas, honey.
Yeah, talk about some raw soul.
Yeah,
right here on Bet All the Network shows.
So yeah, I definitely enjoyed this walk down not memory lane and this ride on the Soul Train.
I love it. And, for a while, I think, in the mid 2000s, the show finally left. For a while, it had been kind of on fumes, the Soul Train, running best of shows. And actually, I enjoyed the best of shows. I would rather, like, say you're like in 2003 or 2004, whatever, I would probably sit down and watch a show from the 80s or the 70s, especially, rather than seeing, new acts from 2000, the early 2000s. So to me, that was pretty cool. But yeah, it finally went off the air, and I think the Tribune company owned it for a while, and Tribune owned, the WPIX station that I mentioned, and many other big independent stations or CW stations at the time around the country. They owned it for a while, and now, it's changed hands, and I guess Viacom, their company, has it. But what a run! 30-some years for anything is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and I do, to go back to your rant. I mean, there's every old show is not. We just have to accept that every old show is not going to make it out there anymore. But there's historical value to the show that I think makes it worthwhile to put out there. And I guess maybe music rights and things like that could hold it up. But
Now, I will say that with the Soul Train Awards and that sort of thing, that has kept the name out there a little bit more. And, books like the one I've been talking about and celebrity advocates, it is talked about in a way that, even American Bandstand and Solid Gold, they're certainly not. I think American Bandstand is seen more of like a relic and not quite as relevant. However, I think if things keep going the way they are, in about 10 years, a lot of the people, you'll have less and less people that grew up watching Soul Train and talking about it, and it might kind of suffer the same fate as American Bandstand. A show that deserves to be remembered, but you really don't hear about it anymore.
yeah, and funny to me that the show I remember the most is the one least remembered, but Solid Gold. But that's just a personal thing. That and I know we talked about it before because you weren't aware of it. The Motown review show, which was only like 6 episodes, but Smokey Robinson hosted, which very often didn't have Motown people on it. But
well, there was a lot of music in the era. You had, variety shows in the 1970s, of course, were huge. And you'd have music on there, and you'd have things like the Midnight Special that we've kind of talked about in our Facebook group. But, some of the shows I think that we had in our poll had that unique thing of being in first run syndication on the weekends, and usually not like late at night. I think we talked, late Soul Train in some areas might be on late at night, but mostly thought of as an afternoon thing. And I think Solid Gold would be like an early evening kind of thing. So it had a little bit of a different vibe than some of those shows like Midnight Special or Don Kirshner's Rock Concert. And I'm glad we kind of get into that in this one.
yeah, I mean, like Solid Gold was closer to a variety show than Soul Train or American Bandstand. It didn't have they had the Soul Train dancers, but they were like professional dancers. So that separates it a little bit.
Yeah, well, every now and then Soul Train would have like a comedian on. I think I saw one episode that did have, but it certainly wasn't a common thing, and it wasn't like it was a novelty to have somebody on. I think Richard Pryor actually guest hosted one time, one of the only times during the show's heyday that Don Cornelius didn't host. But yeah, it was a music show. It was about the culture and everything, but it was music and it didn't have a lot of other things going on. You'd have celebrities dropping by, but they'd be dropping by to experience the music and that part of it, not to do like a 5-minute monologue about some political affairs or something like that. There were other shows for that, but Soul Train kept the focus pretty well, I think, on music for many years, even while maybe shifting and emphasizing certain genres as the times changed. But Soul Train was all about the music.
What celebrity was famous for dropping by?
Who's that?
Ernest Borgnine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You catch a little celebrity bowling and then
yeah, that's
roll on down to the Soul Train studio.
That's the ideal weekend for old Ernie, huh?
Yeah.
Go partake in some of his favorite entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And just be part of it. Just kind of blend in and act like I'm not even here.
Can you imagine you were watching an episode of Soul Train and then like the camera just cut and they're not just like in the bowling, he's just kind of in the background and you just see his weird grin. He's just standing there.
Yeah. And I like the idea of him like acknowledging that the camera caught him, but like, quickly and modestly pointing to some of the dancers as if to say, hey, show them, they're the show here.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just enjoying this like you are.
In that brief period he was married to Ethel Merman, he really got to be into disco. And I'm totally just saying that so that you'll put that clip in the playlist for the 3rd time this season.
Thank you. I was just kind of speculating if Ethel Merman was on Soul Train. I don't think she was, but she had that disco album.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what would I rather see: Ethel Merman performing and people dancing to it, or Don Cornelius interviewing Ethel Merman about that album.
Both.
Yeah,
I
it's part of the whole
I can't
package.
decide. Yeah. And maybe like you're doing the talk show. Like, oh, here's my good friend Ethel.
Yeah. Well, I'll look that one up, but yeah, I don't think she was on there. But Don Henley made it to Soul Train. Ethel Merman didn't.
Right. Bob Dylan didn't.
That could be another, do we talk about the red buttons? I never got a dinner bit,
Uh-huh.
Ethel Merman never got a Soul Train. Red buttons could do a routine about how he never got a Soul Train gig. Maybe he could have done that during the roast, maybe. Abraham Lincoln, who just before he left for Ford's Theater, told Mary, I expect a dull evening at the theater tonight. Never got a Soul Train appearance.
That seems like a good place to pull the train into the station and
Yeah, I think...
wrap things up. But if you want to vote on future polls, you could join our Facebook group.
Yes, please do.
If you're into the Facebook, and we've got a page and we've got a group. In the group, a lot of fun discussion, and we have these polls for episodes like this, and also for certain categories in our Batty Awards. And it looks like we got another show full of songs here to compete with Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July. So the Batty song competition could be quite fierce this season.
I think it will be, as well as maybe some of the appearance-based categories. I think it's safe to say we'll have some contenders. And I want to thank everybody on our Facebook group, and especially those who voted in this particular poll. And I just want to tell people, if some of the other shows we mentioned, the runners-up, they didn't make it to this season, but they may pop up in a future season. And we're demonstrating in this season 9, Mike, that those shows do have a chance of popping up sometime in the future.
That's correct.
So don't give up hope. If you really want Solid Gold or American Bandstand, or anything really, you can always request shows to us through the Facebook group. Or if you don't do Facebook, you can reach us at mailbag@battleofthenetworkshows.com to give us feedback or show ideas, anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's it. Peace, love, and podcasts. Peace, love, and shows. What do you think?
I think peace, love, podcasts, and soul. It all goes together. I feel very, very harmonious and soulful right now. So all of that, I think, can go together in one beautiful, peaceful, loving package.
Awesome.
This episode brought to you by the Soul Hyperloop, all the soul you need in 10% of the time. This episode also brought to you by the Soul Train Scramble from Denny's. Figure out the celebrity name your eggs spell in under a minute to win a free stack of pancakes. This episode also brought to you by Rewind Stubbs, who doesn't just do the robot, he is the robot.
Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network Shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.